Hi, welcome back to the Busy Corner. This is lesson 15. First, before we start the lesson, which is going to be how to knit on two sizes of rods in the same scarf, there were a couple things I wanted to clear up about my lesson yesterday about the rod stands. When your rod stand kit arrives, the base will look just like this. So the legs won't be on and the uprights won't be on. And when you put the uprights on, you will put them in your open T-pieces right here, and they'll angle back. And I forgot to mention that you were going to get two sizes. You're going to get your regular 7-inch size, which is the ones I use most of the time. But for like this little table, I'd rather have the shorter ones. So I'm including in all the kits a 4-inch set too, and I forgot to mention that yesterday. So they'll be, all that will be loose in your bag. It's all described in your instruction sheet. And the rods just fit in there, your uprights, these are your uprights, and they'll point back towards your back legs. So you see that the angle of my stand that I'm using right here, the angle as it tips back is tipping back towards the short back leg. So I hope that clears that up. You can also look at lesson 4 too, but I'd forgotten to tell you that. Also, I decided to make a switch with your tubular knitter that is going to be a bonus in your stationary rod kit. The reason is, when I was first learning how to do this, teaching myself, because I've made this whole thing up, I had better luck with this tubing that wasn't as slick as this. It's easier to hold between your legs, and it's a good beginner hoop. I'm sending the medium size. It's 11 inches, and it cost me the same to make it. It's a little easier for me to make. It's easier to bend, and it will be easier for you to bend also if you want to shape it a little differently. It'll be filled with the wire. It will already be plugged. I'm also adding one of these 11-inch tubes to the 3 set of the circular knitting hoops. So you'll get 4 knitting hoops. One will be this 11-inch clear one, and all for $12. And you might want to start with this one because it was kind of tricky for me to get this right. And once you've made a hat or two, it'll be simpler and you can use the pecs. But for some kind of yarns, you might prefer this because it won't slip off as easily. So that's that. Let's move on. Today's lesson is going to be, and you can see, by the way, on here, what difference that makes between the 7 and the 4-inch. But anyway, let's take this riser out. The first thing I want to show you is I made a swatch of knitting here. It's 10 inches or 10 stitches across, and I think I've done hang on, 2, 4, 6, 8. I was getting ready to start row 9. So I wanted to show you, this is garter stitch, and each side looks exactly the same, and it's bumpy, a little bumpier than the purl side of Stockinette. And the reason I'm going to show you this is what I wanted to do and should have done on the scarf I'm working on. So I'm going to tear my whole scarf out, but I want to show you first, what it would have looked like had I made this choice. So this is what garter stitch looks like on the tiny pipes. Now, let me show you my scarf in progress. Now, the first thing, this is the scarf. So far it is 79 rows long. And I have done it in Lion Brand, thick and quick, and it is in the color Snapdragon. And I had, when I began the scarf, I cast on 14 stitches. I knit in a pattern, front 2, back 2, and that way I could knit, end and begin each row with front stitches, and that way you won't have to remember, oh, is this row start with a front stitch or back stitch? So 14 worked as far as the pattern I wanted to use. And then after I knitted 14 rows, 14 stitches across, remember I started and went 14 rows with 1 strand, then I switched my rods and knitted in stockinette stitch for 6 rows. So you'll see that here is a section that looks different than the knitting, and I repeat that. Every section is the same length. So one side, you'll see the knit side, and if I turn it over, one side is the purl side. Now I made a strange choice when I picked this because I did all these in back stitches, the whole stockinette, each stockinette section, and You can do that. You can do them all in back stitches, or you can do them all in front stitches. It doesn't matter, but they have to be the same stitch or you won't get stockinette fabric. So what I don't like about it is that it's not reversible. Plus, I forgot to put in my little markers when I started, so now it's harder to turn it into an infinity scarf. So I think I'm going to rip the whole thing out, but before I do, I want to show you how to knit on these little tiny rods and how to go about switching your size. So first of all, I took this off my stand to show my other demonstration, and I have to put it back on. And this is a good time to review. When you're not sure, your working yarn needs to be to the inside when you have your rod on your stand. And so I know that this rod that I have in my hand can't go on the right hand side. It must go on the left, because that's where my working yarn is falling. So I had this rod over here to knit that little swatch to show you what garter stitch would look like. So I know this has to be over here on the left, and my working yarn is to the inside. That's just for transport. Plus, by the way, when you take these off and you stick them in a box, you're knitting, stick them like this, and the elbow will prevent all your knitting from sliding off the back. Anyway, so my pattern has been 14 rows, 6 rows, 14, 6. You can see that if you've gone along. The other thing you might notice is, because I knitted these sections in a back stitch to do my stockinette, the stockinette is facing me. It doesn't matter. In some ways, it's easier on these little tiny rods to do back stitch. So that was why I made that choice. But there's a number of ways of doing it. So for our pattern now, I am at row 79. I have one more row to knit before I switch my pipe. So again, I did this in back stitch. If you're working on a scarf, it seems a little heavy, drape it up on your pipe if you want, if you don't want it to hang down or be in your way on your table. And for your back stitches, you know your yarn has to be up, and you're going to have, you have two choices. And I actually had an email this week from a woman who has an issue where she has a little trouble twisting her wrist. So I'm going to show you one technique. And by the way, this isn't dirt. It's gentian violet from treating my chickens. So don't think I have dirty hands. Anyway, so here's a way of doing these stitches that require minimal movement of your wrist when you're doing back stitches on these tiny pipes. If you hold your yarn up in the air, and we're working from left to right, so I like to hold it in my left hand, you take your stitch off, move it forward with your left hand, and put it up here, and you could put your ring finger. You'll notice that I use my right ring finger a lot, and that's because this finger often gives me, it's painful. So however you want to do it is fine. But once you've slipped it onto either of your fingers, then hold the yarn underneath of that. Now, use your fingers. You can use your thumb or along with your finger, whatever you choose, to grab it. Now here's the new stitch in your right hand. Pipe it. You'll want to tighten up the first stitch. I usually do it below the pipe, just like that. Give it a little hold, that knot of yarn or where it loops around, and pull on your working yarn. Alright, let's do that again, because I think this is important, and like I say, it will require minimal movement of your wrist. So off it comes. You can use your finger to push it, use your left hand to push it onto your right finger. Hold the yarn that's in your left hand, put it under your finger. So then now it's under your finger, but right below where the new stitch is going to be made, basically. Grab it, put it on. You can use your right hand to remove it if you want, and just put the stitch up against the working yarn. That's also an effective and easy way to do this. And you'll see that I'm using my left finger to just push the yarn a little bit through the hole. These holes are smaller, so you might find a push technique works just as well. So you're working up here between the pipes, if you want to. You don't have to. You can hold it down here, take it off. Let's do it again. Your yarn saw is to come up, because that's the best way of getting behind this stitch, the old stitch. hold your yarn up, take the stitch off, hold the stitch, lay the yarn over, but notice how I'm twisting my hand to make that stitch. So, your speed will increase if you can decide what feels best and be consistent with that style, and you will get very fast. But you have to listen to your body, and some days my wrists hurt more than my thumbs, and some days my fingers hurt more than my wrists. You get the idea. So again, if you do not want to turn your wrist, the best place to work that stitch is up here. By either pushing it through with your left hand, you can push it off with your left or pull it off with your right. You can hook it like a crochet stitch if you want. But if you notice that, I hardly moved my wrist at all. Now, that completed row 80. I forgot to click my clicker. Now you're ready to switch to the other section, which is your front two, back two. And all you have to do is, now you have your stitches over here. I've made a note here to myself. I know that row 81 has to be the front two, back two on the 1/2 inch pipe. And all I have to do is take off my 3/8 inch pipe, put on my new pipe. Now I have to do front two, back two stitches. And so I'm going to turn my chair just a little bit here. So now you're just going to do a front stitch and a front stitch. Take your yarn up for a back stitch. If you want, I find it's helpful, just jam your finger kind of right into the end of that rod if you want to, and slip it off onto your finger. This is another way you can work it. But notice I've twisted my wrist to do that. It's front two, back two. Front, front. Now I have to do 2 back stitches and 2 front stitches. Notice how I'm sort of laying the working yarn over my index finger, just like I showed you on the knitting tubes, really. In this technique, what I'm doing here, when I push this off onto my upturned finger and laying my yarn right here, but you see, I've just twisted my wrist and forearm to do that, and that might not be comfortable for everybody. The last one's always a little tricky. And now you've completed your first row of front two, back two. And you're going to go back and forth, but before you start the next one, first of all, click your clicker. Oops, I forgot to. Alright, so this is row 82. I do that all the time. Now, before you start your next row, for row 82, you've got to take this off, your 3/8 inch rod, and put on your bigger pipe. So every time, that's all you have to do. Every time you switch your section, before you start, and I'll put all these instructions, detailed instructions. So just know that, you know, and this now is the same way, and all you're doing now is moving from one size to the other. Now it gets a little trickier, and because I'm going to rip this out, let's pretend that I actually knitted my section, and I have to decrease. It's really the same thing. So whether I'm going back to small or small to bigger, it doesn't matter. So I'm just going to pretend that I knitted my whole section. And now, let's say I want to do this whole section now in front stitches. Let's pretend, you know, that I still want to stockinette and I want to do it all in front stitches and not back stitches. So it's basically the same thing. So take off your... So now I'm moving to my stockinette section that I'm going to do all in front stitches. Put it on. Pipe it. If your pipe moves, push it down harder. You don't really have to snug it up every time. Yeah, it's kind of a habit I have. Nervous knitting habit, I guess. But you can see, I mean, these are much easier to make, obviously, because you have a much bigger hole to work with. Because the hole is so small, the opening that is so small, because you're creating the opening with your 3/8 inch pipe, one strand works better. So if you want to double up or add some novelty yarn into the body of your sections, I would use it on the 1/2 inch sections where you have more room to begin with. And that's how you would do a whole row of front stitches on these little pipes. And, you know, if you were, you know, obviously making them bigger is easier than making them smaller, but they work out the same. And I'm going to take just one more second to say I finally signed up for Pinterest. And so now I'm on there. So if you've made some cute scarves, I'd love to see them. So put something in the comment section. And that's all for today.